it's okay.
Hey.
All right. 1 second. All right, it is about 1 after, so we're going to start. And I just want to say good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for attending. We know that this is a weird time of year with having professional development in the middle of the day. We are definitely bound by our contracted hours of 8 to 3. So we are offering this today to all of you. We are recording as well. So I just want you all to be mindful of anything you may share in this training, and just let my presenters know we are recording as well. We're so grateful to have all of you here today. We have Melissa Garcia from SBCEO, who's going to give a short teaser about the Battle of the Books. So in honor of our Dyslexia Month, Melissa, I'll let you take it away.
Perfect. Thank you. And can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
It might be a little small. So thank you for having me. I'm a coordinator of language education services for SBCEO, and I'm here to share the wonderful work that I've been doing with Scott Spector, our academic events coordinator, who was looking to make academic events more inclusive. And with my background in dyslexia, I said, well, how about accessible reading? And so I'm sure most of you are familiar with Battle of the Books. It's a great book list competition where students can read books, and then it culminates to a county competition. This year we have a virtual, we have a team, and then our first ever junior high Battle of the Books. And our focus is really trying to make the opportunities to participate with the book reading more accessible. There's a flyer attached that's easily printed that just goes over the different benefits of accessible reading. So the why, it's inclusive, it's relevant life skills, and it's encouraging, and then some strategies for teachers to think about and incorporate either reading clubs or incorporating those book lists, that book list into their read alouds, family time partner reading, assistive technology, and really thinking about all the different styles of reading and making them accessible to this book list, engaging with this book list. And then of course the benefits are bountiful. I'm sure we could all come up with at least 100, but some of the big takeaways are that advanced oral language, interacting with grade level text, vocabulary comprehension, and then of course kind of that love for reading that we want to foster by saying that there is more than one way to read books, and our academic events are going to reflect that. So thank you for your time. And if you'd like to know more, you can follow up with me, or I think Brian Helt might be able to share that PDF attachment for that flyer, and my information's on there as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We're glad to have you. And this is really exciting information. So very timely, very exciting. And I think my Tracy here from Dyslexia Training Institute to let Melissa come in and do a little teaser for us. So thank you, Melissa.
So much.
Have a wonderful day.
Likewise.
All right. Tracy is here today, and Tracy Zaretsky. Did I say that correct, Tracy?
You know,
and I know there's a hyphenated additional name to that, which
don't worry about it.
I know you as Tracy Zaretsky. So Tracy is here from the Dyslexia Training Institute for a real treat for all of you. I absolutely love seeing Tracy. I wish you were here in person, but we understand.
Ew, I love Santa Barbara.
Yeah. So we're delighted to have you today. Obviously, we have a very small group. We normally had a few more come, but I will watch and admit them as they come. And I just am grateful for your partnership over the years, and I will let you take it away. Thank you, those of you that are here. I hope you enjoy this presentation, day 2 of Dyslexia Training Institute.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thank you for having us come back and share information about dyslexia with your staff, because as you know, it's really important. And without you guys doing what you do so that staff has access to information, they probably wouldn't get updated or accurate information about dyslexia and what should be done to help kids that have dyslexia. So thank you, because it's people like you that are helping make a difference in our school systems for our teachers who desperately want to help these kids. So oh, perfect. I just saw she posted that the PowerPoint handout will be pushed out to you guys in a moment. I probably do it as an attachment here as well. But my name is Tracy Black-Zaretsky. I'm one of the co-founders of the Dyslexia Training Institute. My business partner, Kelly Samian Hurley, did last week. I was traveling last week. She's traveling this week. So she's not able to be here with us this week. She's actually in Washington, D.C., doing some legislative lobbying kind of stuff to try to make changes somewhere, somehow. We do a lot in California. We're based in California as well. We're in Southern California. And we do a lot in California to try to help make legislative change, which is maybe the equivalent of trying to move a mountain. I'm not quite sure. But that's why I'm so grateful to people like Jennifer who find it important to get the information to teachers, no matter what's happening legislatively. So Kelly kind of covered what was happening legislatively last week. We're going to do a little bit different this week. Please do, because we have such a small group, that sometimes that's kind of a great thing, because you get a little more intimate personal time together, which I kind of like. So please feel free to ask questions as we're going. You can unmute yourself or post them in the chat box. I believe I'm going to be able to see my chat box once I share, but let's see. This does not want it. There we go. Sorry, I'm moving things around my screen. Oh, look at that. It's going to let me this time. Let's see. Chat box up. Perfect. Okay. So if you want to type in the chat box, I'll try to keep an eye on that as well. So what we're going to focus on today is more looking at student work samples and what they can tell us. Primarily, we're going to be looking mostly at writing samples, but also how does it fit in looking at what kind of services they would need, and we can just give you an overview of appropriate instruction, not teach you how to do instruction, because that obviously takes way more than just a couple minutes that we're going to have. If we don't get to the appropriate instruction today, I'm not quite sure, like timing wise, especially with questions and stuff, how this might play out. We have our third session to go as well, so we will be able to do that. Hopefully you guys have a piece of paper to write on, some paper and a pencil to write with. And let me see, I don't think, oops, there's somebody to jump in. I think I can't see my cursor for some reason. Because I'm going to have you do a writing simulation. So here's the everybody get a piece of paper and pencil. You're going to end up writing 2 paragraphs. So enough paper to write 2 paragraphs. And actually, while you guys are doing that, I'm going to escape out of here so we can admit, because I can't see my cursor without. It doesn't want me to escape it either. Hey, Jen. There's somebody that's in the waiting room. Thanks. No worries. It's not letting me do it for some reason. I'm going to have you write 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph, I'm just going to give you a couple minutes because this is how it goes in a classroom, right? We've been practicing paragraph writing for quite a while now. So I want you to do your best work with writing your paragraph. So you're going to just write a paragraph about what you did this morning. And I want you to handwrite it. Don't use your computer. I want you to handwrite a paragraph about what you did this morning, but this should be pretty easy because we've been practicing handwriting. So go ahead and write your paragraph. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do it. Oops. You can give you about 30 seconds to wrap up your paragraph. Oh, there's a timer. Okay. So what were you thinking about while you were writing your paragraph? And you can either put it in the chat box or unmute yourself. Either way is fine with me. Actually, I'll stop sharing for just a moment so that I can see everyone. Just trying to include some detail, okay? The sequence of events, about the content, okay? On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being, or 1 to 10, we'll do 1 to 10. 1 being really easy, 10 being really difficult. How would you rate this activity? 1 being really easy, 10 being really difficult. What would you rate it? 2 to 3, 2. Okay. And what, oh gosh. Do you think what ended up on your paper represents your intellectual ability? Yeah. You can see Jennifer going, yeah. Okay. I'm going to have you write a second paragraph. So let me share my screen again, but there's going to be some rules. And you're probably like, why do we have to write our first paragraph? But there's a purpose to it, believe it or not. And so when you're writing your second paragraph, and I'm going to leave this up here so you can see it, I don't want you to use any of the following words: and, before, have, in, of, that, the, to. They should be nowhere on your paper. And while you're spelling, I want you to put a T for every time you would use the letter B when you're spelling, and an A for every time you'd use the letter O when you're spelling. So there should be no T's and A's anywhere on your, B's and O's, sorry, anywhere on your paper. So go ahead, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes to write your paragraph. So you're going to write a paragraph about what you did yesterday. Write a paragraph about what you did yesterday. Following those directions though. So go ahead and start. Make sure you're following the directions. Oopsie. Let me do something really quick here. Accidentally hit the wrong button. That right off again. Okay. All right, so the 2 minutes are up. I'm going to stop sharing again. So we can all just kind of. Okay, so what were you thinking about while you were writing this paragraph? What were you thinking about while you were writing this paragraph? You can either unmute or type it in the chat box, whichever you want to do.
I kept checking your list of what not to use, which slowed down my writing.
Yeah, and you were, yeah, and everybody's saying the same thing. Yeah, kept looking at referring back to the rules, right? And like, what am I doing? And you're thinking, trying to rack your brain for synonyms for all the words I couldn't use, right? Why do you think, well, let me ask you this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult was this task for you? 1 being really easy, 10 being really difficult. So 4, a 10. 7, a 7. Much more difficult than the first one, right? Even though I didn't change your ability to write a paragraph, right? I didn't change your skills that you already have, or make it so that you had to write about content you weren't aware of, right? You're just writing about yourself and what you did. And it made it much more difficult. What made it so difficult? Trying to follow the rules. Malia, I like that that it accidentally misspelled rules when you first did it, because it's all based on spelling, isn't it? Trying to come up with different ways to say what I was trying to get across, knowing that it was time. The unlearning, yeah, that wanting to just spell with automaticity, right? Of course. And so why the reason we have you do this, I was going to ask you why, but due to time, I'm just going to tell you the reason we have you do this is people who struggle with spelling are constantly having to write like this. Is what ended up on your paper a reflection of your intellectual ability or what you really wanted to say? Most likely, probably not, right? And how many of you would like to hang this up on the wall for all the other students to be able to see? We always say the writing's on the wall. We can walk in a room and see the writing on the wall of who's probably struggling a lot with spelling and writing, because it's just literally on the wall. And so we have to think about those things. We had to do this because people who struggle with writing, that's what they're constantly doing. They're constantly having to think about their spelling, and they're constantly rewording what they want to say because they're like, oh, I can't spell that word. I don't know how to spell that word. So one of the activities we often have students do is when they come back from a break, we'll say, you know, what did you write about what you did on your break, right? And they may want to say something like, my family and I went on an amazing vacation to the Grand Canyon. It was immense and beautiful. But what ends up on paper is I went on a trip, because I can't spell vacation, certainly can't spell amazing. Or if they do, it's probably misspelled. We went to the Grand Canyon, which is probably misspelled. It was big. So what ends up on their paper isn't reflective of what they really want to say or their intellectual ability, which is probably what ended up on your paper. It wasn't really what you wanted to say or how you wanted to say it. And they're constantly having to rethink. And so that's why sometimes their writing gets disjointed as well, because they're constantly having to rethink of the words that they want to use, because as one of you said, I was thinking of synonyms to use instead. And so they're constantly thinking, losing their train of their thoughts, and it becomes very laborious to write. So an activity that should be relatively easy, if they didn't have spelling challenges and word choice challenges, becomes a very difficult activity very quickly. All right, we're going to go. So that's a precursor to what we're really going to cover today, for the most part anyways. So let's get past this. And so when we go to schools often, and please know that Kelly and I really love teachers and we love our schools. There's a lot of misinformation out there that we hope to help people rethink about and learn to be able to better help the students that we have. And I can't tell you how many times we've been in an IEP meeting or I've talked to a parent and the school has said, well, spelling isn't important because there's spell check. And or that, it's not as big as a reading is the more important skill. But if you ask people who struggle with spelling, they're going to tell you something different. They're going to tell you it is a really big difference because kids in school end up with red marks all over their paper and lower grades because they can't spell things or they have to reword things all the time. They're embarrassed when they have to try and text their friends and nobody understands what they're saying because they have so many misspellings and the text thing isn't picking up some of it. And if they can't read efficiently enough to pick the right word when it's trying to fill in, they can send things that are also embarrassing. When they go to fill out a job application, it can be very difficult for them to get a job because they can't even spell certain things on their own application if they have to fill it out by hand, or even if they type it on the computer, it can be very difficult. So Dr. Kelly asked people, wrote a book, The Adult Sighted Dyslexia. But we also have worked with lots and lots and lots of kids and adults, obviously through the years, because we started the Dyslexia Training Institute in 2008, but both of us worked in adult literacy. I worked in adult literacy for 15 years before we started the Dyslexia Training Institute, and Kelly was there for 12 years. So we have a lot of experience working with people who struggle with reading and writing. And as she wrote her book, she asked them what they think about if they needed to spell. And here's some things that they said. I was asked how to spell nurse practitioner. She said, if you can't spell it, then that means you shouldn't be it. I'm a trainer and there are times when I'm writing on the board and it's all wrong. You set them up for failure as an adult. If you can't spell, what type of job can you get? What resume can you write? What college can you go to? I can't take notes. I tried to spell the first little piece of information and the lecturer was already 20 minutes into the conversation. I'd lost it. And this is a big one to me. I usually get on rants about making kids take notes who struggle with writing, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, especially in our next training when we talk about accommodations, because, well, our kids are trying to write and copy notes, and I'm going to talk about that later. I'm not going to go there now because I can get on the rant right now, actually. Being able to spell is highly frustrating and embarrassing at times. My poor spelling impacted me in many ways, from filling out forms to doctor's visits and job applications. Simply writing a thank you note can be a challenge. I know an adult who had to fill out a form to get some health services and couldn't fill out the form, took the form home because they were embarrassed because they couldn't fill it out there, took the form home and never got the health services because they couldn't fill out the form. Also, if you're told not to worry about spelling, you're going to be worried. You can't take away that worry. You're going to feel like your ability to communicate is much less. So if I would have told you, don't worry about the spelling, in that activity, just do it the best you can, trying to follow the rules, but don't worry about it too much. It might've been a little bit easier because you already know how to spell, but what if you didn't? It's going to really be difficult. You're disenfranchising a person and taking away their agency towards being understood. I read words wrong at church and I never got back up. I'm going to have to write and it's going to be a mess. Sometimes I cause myself a lot of angst and anxiety and frustration because of that fact, that poor spelling, because spell check can't figure it out. And that's one of the challenges for our students. You're going to do another simulation in our third training that will show you that. Why spell check doesn't really work so well for our students. I still get embarrassed when I cannot spell a simple word, mainly because there is a stigma that if you can't spell, you're not intelligent. You must be stupid. It makes them feel stupid. And everybody we ask always says they want to be a better speller. And when you talk about that, when I say this, that they want to be a better speller, people often say, well, everybody wants to be a better speller. That's just normal. Here's the difference is for them, they're spelling so bad that spell check can't figure it out. And often people trying to read theirs can't figure out. We may misspell a word, but most people can probably figure out what we really meant. And so it's very different for them. It's not the same. This is a new trend in schools, is that we don't teach spelling. I don't know why this is coming about, but it has become a new trend. I'm hoping it's not happening in Santa Barbara area, but it's becoming a new trend to say spelling isn't important, so we're not teaching spelling, and we've heard it a lot. But what does IDA say about that? The IDA, which is the Individual with Disabilities Act, which is the federal law, and California must follow the law, defines A specific learning disability is a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language spoken or written that may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, and to do mathematical calculations. And then it goes on to say the disability categories included such conditions as perceptual brain, or perceptual disabilities, brain injuries, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. It specifically even says dyslexia right in there, but it's the spelling that we're going to talk about because it does affect writing. And what do our own Common Core standards say? Our own Common Core standards in every grade level, I just took grades 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 12. All of them say, demonstrate command of the conventions of standard English capitalization, punctuation, and spelling when writing. Every grade level, our own Common Core standards say that spelling is important. Oops. Oh, why does that not want to do? And spelling affects reading, writing, and vocabulary. And we're going to look at some of our own California state standards as well, and that talk about being able to decode the fluency, the comprehension. It affects writing with encoding and composition. You guys just saw how much it impacted your writing with that activity when you had to stop and think about your spelling, which also affected, stop and think about your word choice. It greatly impacts the composition. And spelling can greatly impact your vocabulary for reading, for writing, and for oral communication. So looking back at the Common Core standards, I'm going to go through these relatively quickly because we only get 2 hours today. I wish we had, lots of hours because we could certainly take them. But Jennifer's been so gracious as to give us multiple days to train in, which I appreciate. But if we look at, this is kindergarten, first and second grade, and you'll notice that a lot of it has to do with reading, but if you look at what it's saying, and I picked these particular ones, it all has to do with the structure of words and spelling rules of words. And so it's in kindergarten, associate the long and short sounds of the common spellings for the 5 major vowels. Well, to be able to figure out a word, you have to understand their spelling. To be able to read a word, you have to understand it. Decode regularly spelled one-syllable words. No final E and common vowel team conventions for representing long vowel sounds. These all have to do with spelling. You have to understand spelling to be able to decode words with common prefixes and suffixes. Well, to be able to recognize a prefix or suffix, you need to know the spelling of that prefix or suffix. Identify words with inconsistent but common spelling sound correspondences. Grade 3, identify and know the meaning of most common prefixes and derivational suffixes. Decode words with common Latin suffixes. This is grade 3. We're talking about Latin, looking at Latin, which has a great influence on our language, but looking at those suffixes. Grade 4, use combined knowledge of all letter sound correspondence, syllabication, patterns, and morphology, roots and affixes to read accurately unfamiliar multisyllabic words in context and out of context. So all of that is looking at the structure of words, and to be able to look at structure of words, you have to understand spelling. The same thing with grade level 5 and 6. Grade level 5, it even says spell grade appropriate words correctly, consulting references as needed. Spelling is consistently in here, roots and affixes, being able to look at the structure of language. Grade 6, demonstrate command of the conventions of standard English capitalization, punctuation, and spelling. Spell correctly. Use common grade appropriate Greek and Latin affixes and roots as clues to the meaning of words. We have to understand spelling to be able to identify roots and bases and prefixes and suffixes. Grade 7, still spell correctly. Use common grade appropriate Greek and Latin affixes and roots. It's through every grade level. Grade 8, spell correctly. Use those Greek and Latin. Grade 9 and 10, demonstrate the convention of standard English capitalization, punctuation, and spelling when writing. Spell correctly. Grades 9 and 10, just continuing. You'll see it continually in there. All the things that have to do with spelling. Identify and correctly use patterns of word changes that indicate different meanings or parts of speech. Look at the example they gave that has to do with looking at your morphemes. Identifying morphemes, you have to be able to understand the structure of the language. Consult general and specialized reference materials, both print and digital, to find pronunciation of a word, to determine the clarity, its precise, clarifying its precise meaning, its part of speech, or its etymology. Etymology has to do with looking at structure of words as well. And then goes all the way through 12th grade, still spelled correctly and using all the things we've talked about already. So it's in our California state standards from kindergarten all the way through the 12th grade. So there is no doubt that looking at language structure is really important. So spelling instruction based on the Common Core standards should include grapheme morpheme options, grapheme phoneme options. It should include morphology, teaching bases, roots, affixes, prefixes, teaching the etymology and the conventions of the English language. And even research shows spelling instruction should be included to do addressing all the above. There's a lot of great research out there that is showing that looking at morphology and etymology are really key in improving spelling instruction. So what can we bring to the table? Of course, we need to be collecting data to show what the needs are of an individual student, right? And they need to qualify for services. And a lot of that comes from the quantitative data. Test scores, test scores, test scores. You want to look just at test scores, but IDEA requires we look at the whole child, not just test scores. We need to look at the qualitative data as well. That's an important piece to this puzzle. So what are some of the things we can look at? Writing samples, homework logs. So I encourage parents and I encourage teachers to tell parents to do this, because as a teacher, you don't know this information unless a parent's providing it for you. So one of the ways we tell parents to keep a homework log is date every day, write down each piece of homework the student does, how long it is taking them to do it, and how much support the parent is providing. Because you as a teacher can get homework from student A and student B and know that student B, struggles a little bit. But if their parents are the more typical type parent, they're helping their child get their homework done because they want their kid to make sure they're turning in their homework appropriately, right? They want them to have their homework completed, so they're turning it in. But you don't know as a teacher how much support that parent had to provide and how much more time it took student B. So we need that actual data. And I tell parents this all the time, that data is so valuable for you as a parent and for the school to be able to identify how much more effort the child's putting in. And I have yet for a parent to do this and a teacher to not look at it and go, oh my God, I had no idea that it was that much more work for the student. And they may have known that it was taking some time, but they usually don't know how much extra effort it is. And that data and that homework log is so important because it can show that this child is, yes, meeting the requirements of getting the homework done and maybe even getting good grades on it, but they're putting in an extraordinary amount more effort and needing more support than their peers. And part of IDEA is saying that if it's affecting schooling, it's affecting their schooling, then there's a need, right? Well, if they're putting in way more effort than their peers, then it is affecting their disabilities are affecting their school. Behaviors during reading and spelling. Some of that document what their behaviors are like when they are required to do reading or required to do writing. Some reading samples, of course, recording them can be very helpful, but doing those, if you're going to do a fluency check, the fluency check should not be on just a minute or two, unless that student's already struggling at a minute or two. If you have a student that's reading fairly okay, or appears to be reading fairly okay, that fluency check should be on a 5+ minutes, 5 to 10 minute read, where you're tracking every minute and all the errors that are happening within those minutes, how many words they're reading each of those minutes, and how many errors are happening each of those minutes. And then you chart it. And what you'll see is from kids who are struggling, even if they're reading okay at those first 2 minutes, they're probably going to start to see fewer number of words per minute and the number of errors going up. So the correct words per minute is going down. So the number of words per minute is usually going down. The errors are usually going up. And then their overall correct words per minute is going down. And it's looking in that data, and that will show you the fatigue factor that happens for our kids and why accommodations will continue to be needed. But it'll also show you the struggle. You may not see that struggle in the first minute or two, but you'll start to see it in maybe 5 or 10 minutes, where they're really starting to struggle and their errors really increase. And that error analysis can give you a lot of information, and their error analysis with remediation will change over time. They may still get several areas, but what you want to look at is what kind of errors are they having now compared to previously. So it can show you where their growth is and where they still need to go. Classroom and home observations, outside tutoring input. If they're getting some private tutoring, that input can be very, very helpful with showing if they're making growth. Is it only in the area where that private tutoring is happening, or is it also in the area where the school is providing services? And if it's happening mostly in the area that tutoring is happening, well, what is that tutor doing? What kind of instruction are they providing that's helping that student? And where does that outside tutor see that the students' difficulties are most? And the student's own voice, especially as they go up in grade. But even as young as kindergarten, first grade, they can usually express how they feel about reading. But as they get older, they can even tell you what parts of reading and writing are difficult for them and how they're feeling and what they think could help them. They may or may not know, but we want to get their input as well. So writing samples are an important piece of the evaluation process to provide additional information. I think when you look at writing, it will tell you so much about what they understand about language. It tells you what the student knows about the writing system, what needs the student may have, and what goals they may need. That should be on a separate line, sorry about that, and what accommodations they may need. So let's take some time and look at a few writing samples and determine what these writing samples might tell us. So looking at this one, this is a third grader. What might this writing sample tell us? Looking at it, so what he says on this, I need to stop sharing for just a sec. I mean, not stop sharing, I need to get out of this mode so I can move this and get my text box, chat box. You can either put it in the chat box or you can unmute. Looking at this, what do you think this writing sample tells us? And I can tell you, this is what it says. I went to the Padres game. It was fun. The Padres lost, but they tried their very best. Wrote out the alphabet on top as a guide. He was told, I will tell you, he was told to write the alphabet. But looking at the alphabet and how he wrote it, what might it be telling us? Well, you're right. Some students do that. They write it right. They might write the alphabet or certain letters at the top of their page because they struggle with them, or their parent might. Anything else it might tell you? They have that common BD reversal. And I love when he wrote it. When he wrote his alphabet and when he wrote B's, and he had to write B and D down in his actual sentences, he would write both. He'd write one right on top of the other. That way he's covered. He's got it. Kind of smart, right? Some words are spelled correctly. Absolutely. So when we're looking at writing samples, we don't want to just look at the struggle. What is it that they do understand? What is it that they don't understand about the English language, right? Did you notice it's also, he has punctuation only at the very end? Is this really just one sentence? I went to the Padres game. It was fun. The Padres lost, but they tried their very best. It's really not one sentence. So he's struggling with punctuation, obviously struggling with the spelling. Gosh, my brain is taking a little break, I guess. So let's look at some of the things that it says he's struggling with. Oopsie. Don't want to let me see my cursor easily with. It says, it shows the student is trying, right? This is one of, and the reason you're going to see this on all of my students' thing is that one of the things that we see on students' report cards or hear often in meetings is that if they just tried harder, they would do better. If they just tried harder, if they focused more, they would do better. The student is trying. They're trying their best. It tells us with the alphabet. I love the end of the alphabet. Do you notice he put X, Y, and Z? He put his N there instead of where it belongs, because that's what we say. He's saying the alphabet in his head, right? That LMNOP part is very difficult for our students. That LMNOP, very difficult for our students. You notice his G and his J, they look similar. He made it look a little bit different. He knows that that goes above it, but he's still even struggling with that G and J, and obviously with that B and D, right? Their letter formation, the reversals, the orientation, staying on a line, very difficult. The sentence structure, it's just one long run-on sentence. He does have punctuation. Sometimes our students have zero punctuation, but he does know that he has a period at the end. So that's great. Like that would be something like, look at that. You got a period at the end of your writing. That's excellent. Peer repetition by sight will not help this student. It just won't, because, and this is why I know that. Do you notice how he spelled Padres? That's our home team, obviously here down in San Diego. Our professional team is the Padres, but he plays baseball and his own team is named the Padres. So he has seen that name, not just on his uniform, but all of his teammates' uniforms for years and still has no idea how to spell this word. He has seen it many, many times on his own clothing and his teammates' clothing for years and has not picked up how to spell Padres at all. Basic spelling rules, that every syllable must have at least one written vowel. He's struggling with those kinds of concepts and struggling with the suffix ed, right? And so if you see tried, their very best. He's struggling. What skills do we need to address in goals? Direct explicit instruction in spelling, direct explicit instruction in suffixing rules and suffixing conventions, direct explicit instruction in polysyllabic words. Any accommodations, some accommodations we could consider. Now we'd have to look at what skills does the student have? Are their voice strong enough? We'd have to really evaluate each individual student, but that's why I said, should we consider speech to text, a scribe, having somebody write for them, teach the student how to type. Now my son has very, very severe dysgraphia. You're actually going to see one of his writing samples, I believe. Has very severe dysgraphia. I started to teach him how to type when he at the end of kindergarten. By third grade, he was a pretty good typer, believe it or not. And using predictive software. So that's when you're typing and gives you ideas of words to fill in or spellings. My son's like he's in 11th grade now. He's the most efficient predictive software user I've ever seen, because he can type and be like, and click on all, like, I'm like, I don't even know how he does it that quick. Okay. So let's look at another one. So that was one third grader. This is another third grader. And so looking at this, what are some of the things it can tell you that this student is struggling with language? And you can either unmute or type it in the chat box. Definitely struggling with reversals. So we'll see that common theme often, size. His E and G's. So when people say it's just B and D, they're different kids, it's different letters that they struggle with formation and identification and formation. Planning his word length. So it's pretty clear the student probably, well, I shouldn't say it's pretty clear. One of the things that they should be evaluated for is having potential dysgraphia, as well as issues with dyslexia, because dyslexia affects not only reading, but it affects writing as well. So let's go and look at, this is what it really said is, I went camping this summer. I got a trailer this summer. My dog got an ear infection this summer. My box is in my way, so I can't see the whole thing. What does the writing sample tell us? Once again, this student is trying. If you thought this was easy, this is a kid that was trying really hard and he didn't give up. So when we're told they just need to try harder and practice more, this kid has been practicing and trying really hard for a while. This is not lack of effort on its part of the student. There's definitely characteristics of dysgraphia. You can't diagnose it. You need to just by looking at writing, but They have to have formal assessment, but definitely characteristics of dysgraphia, their letter formation, their letter orientation, keeping to the left of the paper when they're writing, keeping their letters on the line, the size, it's just really telling by third grade, they should have a little bit better formation of letters and spacing and everything. Their capitalization to ensure when and how to use capitalization. Punctuation, again, really common with our students. They're struggling so much to just get their thought on the paper because they're thinking about word choice and spelling and how to form letters and how to form sentences. And so punctuation often gets missed. Not sure when to use a final E, doesn't know when to use C or K, was confused about which one was the correct one to use. So what are some skills we'd obviously need to address in goals? Direct explicit instruction and spelling rules, direct explicit instruction in polysyllabic words. And have they been assessed for fine motor skills? Do they need an OT? Is this a fine motor skill, only a fine motor skill issue, or is it dysgraphia? So my son has severe dyslexia, really severe dysgraphia. And he does not have any fine motor issues. It's not a fine motor. He can take this, when he was little, could take the smallest little Legos and make all kinds of amazing things with it. He can do all kinds of other fine motor skill things. You could button his shirts, he could, tie his shoes, he can do it. Well, tying his shoes was hard just because of the sequence of it, but he could do it. It wasn't a fine motor issue, it was an executive functioning issue. So he didn't have fine motor skill issues. And that's how it's more dysgraphia than just needing to work on fine motor skills. Some things to consider for possible accommodations is that speech to text, a scribe, special lined paper. So for some students that can help. Some paper actually even has like a little bit of a raised line on it to keep, so they know what that baseline is and help them. Teach them to type. We would have to look at all the different appropriate accommodations through an assistive technology assessment for the student with each of our students. So this is actually my son. This was him in 5th grade, doing a copying activity from the board. So every day they would have to write down in their planner what was written up on the board to be able to keep track of. So what do you notice from this?
It seems like he's skipping a little bit.
Yeah, no, he did skip a couple things, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in a moment. There not always is there something filled in on everything, but he wasn't even always sure where to put stuff. And this was 5th grade, and my son has a normal IQ, by the way. Doesn't have an intellectual problem. He does not have a visual processing issue. He does have very severe dyslexia and very severe dysgraphia. He does have ADD as well, with an extra help, ADD combined type with an extra helping of H. So in 5th grade, in kindergarten through 5th grade, in his classes, he always had a stretchy band across the legs of his chair so he could bounce his legs on it because it helped him focus. And he had squishies sometimes, but they weren't really that effective for him because they were almost more distracting than anything. The bouncing his legs was huge. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my Joe. First off, he's trying. This is how I know he's trying. He had the accommodation of taking a picture, which he did. He took a picture every day, and every day he would sit down and copy it. Every day. He didn't have to, but he did. You can tell his dysgraphia in there because he's struggling with letter formation, staying on the line. He had serious fatigue at the end of the day. On Wednesday, you notice under other, he starts to write cover and then scribbles, and then the other, it's literally a scribble, literally. And I just asked him, I'm like, hey, Joe, what happened there? It's not a big deal because we always have a picture. I said, what happened there? He goes, oh, Mom, we did it at the end of the day. They usually did it at the beginning of the day. when he was so fatigued and tired because school was really fatiguing and tiring for him. And he said, we did at the end of the day, and it was just so hard. And we had to hurry. Well, what are the two worst things to do to somebody who has a learning disability? Do it when they're most fatigued, and do it and rush them. So this is what ended up happening. But you'll also notice, this is why I was copying is extremely difficult for him. And it's extremely difficult for most kids with dyslexia, and especially if they have dysgraphia with it. Not all kids that have dyslexia also have dysgraphia, but look it up on the 8th. You'll see it says other, it says carrying coins. Notice he doubled his R in carrying, and then in canned foods, he has only a single N. And I'll tell you how this happens. It's not because he's not paying attention. This is how kids with writing disabilities and reading disabilities copy. They go letter, 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 letter. Do I have that letter? Oh, wait, because they struggle with spelling. So they do. You and I, when we copy stuff from the board, look at a group of words and we write them down. They may get one or two of those words, but many of the words they're copying letter by letter by letter by letter, and they can't remember. Was that 1 or 2 hours? Well, I already have 2 hours and just keep going, right? It's so difficult for them, right? Copying is so difficult for them. And what's happening usually when we're having our students take notes, usually when we have our students taking notes, not just doing a copying activity, but taking notes, they may be copying from the board during lecture time, is the teachers talking, giving content. Our students are so focused with trying to just get what's on the board onto the paper, they can't process what the teacher's saying. So now what do they end up with? Really bad notes that they really can't probably use for studying, and they miss the content. So why are we having these kids write notes? And I'll tell you, he's in every year, especially in middle school and high school, several teachers were like, well, he needs to learn how to take notes because he's going to have to do it in college. I go, in college, he'll also have accommodations because all of a sudden his disability won't go away because he's graduated from high school. So he'll have accommodations in college. And so I had to fight for him to have the accommodations. And I'd always ask the teacher, what is the point of the notes? What do you want your student to get out of the notes? And they said, so that they learn the most and they have them to study from. I go, but for these kids, their notes are so poor, they're not worth studying off of often, and they missed all the content you were giving. So isn't the purpose of your class to learn content? If the purpose of your class, if what you want your student to do is get content, then we have to do what we put accommodations in place to help them get the content, because they're missing way too much if they're forced to take notes. And I share this one specifically because of that. So we want to make sure, what skills do they need to address in goals? So we have to be sure they've been assessed for the fine motor skills. I told you my son didn't have fine motor skill issues, but some kids do. And do they need an OT? So accommodations, have their class notes supplied. Now, one of the things, because my son has ADD, but this has been for many students I've advocated for. I'm talking about my son just because it's so personal, but I've also advocated for students where to have them engage with their notes. So if their notes are supplied, then for my son, he had to circle certain things, highlight certain things, underline certain things, so that he was engaged with his notes because he had ADD, so he got distracted easily. So to keep him, engaged with his notes and listening to the teacher. My son has severe dyslexia. He's always read on grade level because we started his remediation very, very young, literally in preschool. And so by 5th grade, he was reading 5th grade content. So his wasn't a challenge with reading. He fatigued very easily. He fatigued very easily when he had to do sustained reading because he had double deficit dyslexia where he struggled with the phonological processing, and he has rapid naming deficit. So he could read, but he can't. Doing sustained reading, he would get fatigued easily. What are the most supportive accommodations for a student with dyslexia? I'm going to talk about a little bit of accommodations as we're going through today, but our last session is going to be a lot about accommodations. So I can't remember the date of the last training off the top of my head, but we're going to be focusing mostly on accommodations that day. And it'll be recorded as well. So if you can't attend, you'll be able to watch the recording. Okay. Oops, come on. Okay. So let's look at this writing sample. Now this is a 6th grader. So we're going, 3rd, We had a couple third graders, we have a fifth grader, and now a sixth grader. So looking at this, what might it tell you? Because I bet you could all read this without any help. I can read it to you if you would like. Get out of this because I have to move things out of my way so I can see the whole thing. Maybe I'll just stay in this mode so I don't have to keep getting in and out of it. The reason we go to the UN is because, oh, well, I love the beginning of it. Why we go to the UN. So their school is going to Washington, D.C. They get to go to the UN. In Washington, D.C., they have kids who have done a school project where a kid or a group of kids study a country and they get to go present a resolution for that country in front of the UN. So there's different countries being represented by different kids through this a UN meeting. So why we go to the UN? The reason we go to the UN is because it is a great learning experience. It will teach your child all about how to write resolutions about the government and culture. How to interact with people from different nations is a skill that is practiced in the UN. I love this writing sample. What is this one telling us? Writing out long vowel sounds. She doesn't know the patterns for writing long vowel sounds. Like how do we represent long vowel sounds in written form? What graphemes and spelling options are there for it? And you can see she's really struggling with that concept. She's got a lot of great punctuation though. Do you know, like, her exclamation point can look like a question mark? We talked about that a few times. I'm like, yeah, it looks like you're asking a question, and she drew me a question mark, and I'm like, oh, see, they do look different, but her those are all exclamation points to her. So let's look at some of the things it might tell us. Oh, good Lord. I have to move things to be able to get to the next thing. Okay. So this writing sample tells us that this student is obviously trying. And as I said, you're going to see this on everyone because it can't tell you. Even on her, I actually saw her report cards and it said on there, Taylin would actually be doing better with her writing if she practiced more and tried harder. I was like, makes me crazy. Is sounding out all words. And I think that comes from, I'm not trying to pick on teachers. I think it comes from the fact that these kids are smart and she loved to talk. So she had a great oral vocabulary. And so it was there was this idea that, you're intellectually capable. So if you just, focused more, you would do better. And that's not what it's about. It has to do with her learning disability. She's sounding out all of her words, because you can figure out all of that just by looking at what word letter graphing choices she chose, but she doesn't know what all of the phoneme graphing options are. She needs help with sentence transitions. And she does know punctuation, but may need a little help with commas and a little bit of help with capitalization. But she does, it's important that we do acknowledge what she does know, of course. So what skills do we need to address in goals? She needs direct explicit instruction in the phoneme graphing options, the letter sound system of our language, direct explicit instruction in bases, prefixes, and suffixes. Because look at, just for an example, practiced in the very last sentence on the very, very bottom, practiced. I love that she did IST because that's how it sounds, practiced, right? Nations, she doesn't know our ION suffix, right? There's several suffixes that she's really struggling with. Explicit instruction in suffixing rules or the suffixing conventions, explicit instruction in spelling rules, and direct explicit instruction in polysyllabic words. Some accommodations, again, speech to text, scribe, predictive software, having your class notes supplied, because this would be a great example of a student who struggles so much with spelling that taking class notes is very, very difficult for her. So here's a seventh grader. Oh, this isn't supposed to be there quite yet, but that's all right. Oh, because I'm not in presentation mode, that's why it's already there. So this is this is actually my son again in 7th grade. And he actually did this as homework at home. I was making dinner and he had to read an article, a longer article, and he was supposed to write 3 main points from the article that he found interesting. 3, only 3. And he wrote, when we say write in my house, it means get your computer out. So why he hand wrote this, I still to this day have no idea why he did, other than it gave me this amazing writing sample I get to share in training all the time, because I think it's such a great writing sample. So this is my son in 7th grade. He's had OT, he's done handwriting without tears, he's done real script. He doesn't have fine motor skill challenges, but he's done everything. He's used that special lined paper. We've done it all to try to help him improve his actual handwriting, but he has really severe dysgraphia. So this is him in 7th grade. He does not have a counting problem. He does not have an intellectual problem. He thinks he wrote 13 things. So when he brought it, I'm like, oh, Joe, you only had to write 3. Well, first off, why weren't you typing? He goes, I don't know. I didn't want to get my computer out, which I thought was hilarious because this is so much work for him and typing so much easier for him. But he didn't want to get his computer out for whatever reason. And he goes, I go, you only had to write 3 things though, bud. And he said, well, it was a really interesting article. So I just kept writing things down. He goes, and I wrote 13. And then I looked at his numbering. Look at his numbering. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 12, 13. He was so fatigued, he literally couldn't even count anymore. He does not have a problem counting. He can count perfectly fine, but this just shows his fatigue. Notice number 1 and number 2, very long. By 13, it's just this little, I can't read a lot of this. Most of it I can't read, and I can read a lot of his writing. I can't read a lot of this. I can read a lot of stuff in the first 2. By 3, it's getting really difficult. 4 and below, there's very little I can read out of it. There's very little he could read out, but look at by number 3, number 1 and number 2, he's staying on the line okay, for better than usual, right? By 3, staying on the line is becoming extremely difficult for him. And he's just, really struggling with the formation of letters. And he struggles with, he just struggles with getting his thought out because of writing so fatiguing with him. He has great thoughts, but to get it on paper is very difficult. So punctuation is missing, capitalization is missing. All of those things are really, really difficult. So some of the things it tells us is, he struggles with the punctuation, which is not necessarily true when he's doing the typing. He actually does his punctuation pretty well. His graphing, phoneme option, spelling of high frequency words, spelling of polysyllabic words. He has characteristics of dysgraphia based on the letter formation, staying on the line and spacing between words, shows serious writing fatigue. And as I said, he lost count. He couldn't even keep track of his numbers. Is this helpful to you guys to see this? Hopefully it is. So here's a 9th grader. I wanted to go through all the grade levels because you guys deal with all the grade levels. What might this one be telling you? Oh, good. I'm glad it's very helpful to see these. Okay, let's I'm gonna.
It is, but also a little depressing with all the help that your son got.
So, but it would be depressing to me too, except that when he's typing, you would not even know it's the same kid.
Okay, so that's good because most of what we do is typing anyway.
Yeah. So when he's typing, he can type coherent sentences and get his thoughts down much easier. The physical act of writing is so extraordinarily difficult for him. Just the physical act of it is so extraordinarily difficult for him. And it's not that, this is why, if you want to talk about a kid who's not trying, he only had to write 3 things and he knew he only had to write 3 things and he thinks he wrote 13.
Yeah. Well, the writing fatigue is absolutely a thing.
Oh yeah, but just even that first sentence was difficult for him. So it's just really, really severely difficult for him. This student might have some mild dysgraphia because this is him in 9th grade, but we can read pretty much everything. So I'll tell you what his actual thing says. It says, today we went to Fred's. Then I caught a crab. Today I went skimboarding and caught a fish. Now notice his caught in his first one is C-O-U-T. His caught in the next one is C-O-T. I had too many Cokes today. He's still struggling in 9th grade. He's still struggling with that BD reversal. Now, hopefully you remember from Kelly's presentation that they do not see things backwards. It's that they're struggling with the orientation, and that orientation matters when it comes to print. Their brain is really struggling with that. I had too many Cokes today. I made a surfboard blanket. There was a big shore break. There was a massive stingray. I surfed a small wave. We ate crab for dinner, and I grabbed a stingray. He really didn't grab a stingray. He was just getting Kelly's attention. This is a student that Kelly has worked with on and off for a couple of years. And now look at his grabbed. He has his BD, and his first one though he wasn't quite sure which way it went, but he knew he needed both. So then he wrote over with the B and then put the D in, but didn't spell it correctly, obviously. So this student is trying. He does have punctuation. He has periods at the end of all of his things, which is great. He does, but he needs some help with probably some grapheme phoneme options, spelling of high frequency words, spelling of polysyllabic words, and spelling rules. And so a lot of this, when she asked him to just do a write without doing any editing, he could go back and check some of this, and he'd be able to fix some of his errors. Because, for example, if you looked at where it says I surfed a small wave, right? There's a few words he has no vowel in it at all. He knows every word in the English language has to have at least one vowel. He knows every syllable in the English language, written syllable must have at least one vowel. Those are things he knows. And massive, like he knows in English we don't end a word in V, so an E goes there. But they're so focused on trying to get a thought on paper that I love that he used the word massive instead of going, I don't know how to spell it. But he could go back and go, oh, I know I need an either. No, he also is missing an S in it. Would he be able to catch that? Possibly. So there was stuff they were still working on to help his spelling get better, but he still needed some instruction. So what are some things he needed? He needs direct explicit instruction, grapheme phoneme options, bases, prefixes, and suffixes, the suffixing conventions, spelling rules, and polysyllabic words. And again, speech to text, scribe, predictive software, class notes applied. Those are not the only things, but those are some pretty standard ones. And we're going to, as I said, in the next training, talk more about accommodations. All right, so I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to actually increase this one. I want you guys to look at this one and see what you think after looking at those, what you think this writing sample. Can you guys see it well enough? If I increase it, can you guys see that well enough? It's the title is A Great Birthday Present. Do you want me to read it to you? Would that help? What it's actually supposed to say, what it does say. It's not what it's supposed to say, what it does say to her. Well, let me give you a moment and see. I'm going to give you just like maybe a minute to try and figure it out, and then I'll read it to you. Hopefully I remember what it all says. All right, I'm going to read it to you. Hopefully you got through most of it anyways. It says, a great birthday present. One day I was playing with my, oh my God, penguin, I forget what that word is.
Toy penguin?
Oh, yeah. Toy penguin, thank you, yes. Swish, squish. Oh, and she goes, swish, squish. Oh, now here comes the monster. I said, suddenly my mom opened the door. I forget that word. You scared me, I said.
Jumped,
I jumped. Oh, yes,
jumped.
thank you. I jumped. You scared me, I said, with my mom left. It's time. Oh, my mom laughed. My mom laughed. Sometimes it takes me a moment to remember what these say, but if I look at it, I can figure it out. Laughed. L-A-F-T. Makes sense, right? Laughed. It's time for lunch. So I said, you can play with her after lunch. My mom said, okay. Do you love her? Okay. O-W-C-A-Y. And I said, slowly, I left my toy and walked down the stairs with my mom. That's what it says. So what are these things telling you? Sometimes it takes me a little bit. I even love her suddenly. S-O-D-I-N-L-Y. Sudden. And then her Lee is like separated from the word.
She's a good writer.
She has
She
great
just
thoughts.
can't write.
She has amazing. It's a great story, a great
If we could get her to use
imagination.
speech to text and teach her how to edit.
Yes, and Kristen, as you point out too, it's great. She tried to even use dialogue, which was awesome. Absolutely fabulous for sure. So you're right. Some things that would help her, having a scribe or that speech to text. If she has predictive software, she's learning to type. So parents and teachers often ask, like, what's the best typing program? This is my response to that. One that your student's going to use, your student or child is going to use, and is going to teach them, good home row and proper typing skills, because different kids like different things about typing programs. My son's now, as I said, in 11th grade, he's 16 years old. The program he used probably doesn't even exist anymore, but it had, like, he had to do some typing exercises, but there was games that were associated to it, and they could go up in levels. And one of the things he liked about it most is that at the end of learning like a certain series of keys, there was a time test, and what it would do is it would time him and he would do it, and then he could try and beat his time, and if he beat his time, he got an extra reward for the game. And so he loved that. So it really motivated him to do it. Find something that your kid's willing to do, but have them only do it like 5 to 10 minutes a day. Everybody wants their kids to do it 15, 20, 30 minutes a day. Have them just start with 5 or 10 minutes a day. 5 or 10 minutes is doable. It'll get them some going, and move up to maybe at the most 15 minutes a day. If they're doing that 10 to 15 minutes a day, their typing will get better. So I think we try to make them do it for too long a period of time, and they get really frustrated and maybe even sometimes bored with it, but they'll get more frustrated than anything. So do it for a short period of time more frequently than doing it a long period of time, only a couple days a week. Are you saying that orienting to the typing is different than orientating to writing? What do you mean by that?
Well, so earlier, I'm sorry, I realized I thought I had my mute off in my camera, but so what I heard you say earlier was that it wasn't that the students had difficulty in how they saw the letters. It was how they orientated themselves to the text.
Oh, so
And so
let me
then-
clarify that. That's a really good question. Thanks, Patrice. Is that, so they see print like you and I see print. They don't see things backwards, inside out, or anything like that. They see print like you and I see print. What they're challenged with is when we're born and until we are exposed to print, an object's an object, no matter how it's oriented in space. It does not matter, right? Like, I could pick up anything, like my phone, right? I can pick up my phone, no matter which way I turn it, it's still a phone. No matter what, it's still a phone. Then we're introduced to print, and all of a sudden a symbol, like a line with a stick, I mean a line with a circle, right? Like, can be a B, a D, a P, a Q. It all has to do with how it's oriented on the line. So your brain actually has to learn that orientation matters when it comes to print. It could be like N and U, or, that student that struggled with E and G for some reason, that in their brain, that was really just a difficult concept for them, I guess. F for some student can be F and T, because in certain fonts that F and T can look similar, right?
Mhm.
That's really uncommon. The most common is that BD confusion. It's where the misconception that people with dyslexia see things backwards. It's where it comes from, is that their brain isn't seeing it backwards. They're struggling with the orientation. Their brain's having a hard time learning that orientation matters when it comes to print. Now, everybody's brain has to learn that. But it's developmentally normal once you get to like second, end of first into second grade, depending upon the age of the student, maybe even a little bit longer than that. That they'll learn that orientation matters when it comes to print. Some will learn it, really quickly and really easily. Others it'll take a little bit longer, but it isn't uncommon for students with dyslexia, with print-based disabilities, to struggle with it even longer. And as you saw with that ninth grader, he was still struggling with it in ninth grade.
So
Right?
have you ever done a study with different languages from different cultures to see the degree of the percentage of people who are identified as dyslexic with different languages?
There are lots of studies out there with, so dyslexia is a neurological processing difference in the brain, right? So if you're born with it, you're born with it. It doesn't matter what language you're learning. What impacts it has on the learning can be influenced somewhat by the actual language.
Right, the degree to which they have an orientation difficulty would be dependent upon the way the language is written.
No, but know that everybody with dyslexia doesn't have that orientation challenge.
But there are 4 different types of dyslexia, right? Aren't there 4 different types? I was told there were 4.
That's debatable whether there's not really 4 different types. There's sets of symptoms, and what symptoms each person has is they'll have their set of symptoms, right? And the severity of it would be mild, moderate, severe to profound. And that's why 2 people with dyslexia don't look exactly the same, as they'll have their set of symptoms, and the severity of those symptoms compile up into being mild, moderate, severe, profound. There's people with dyslexia that can read well enough to keep up with grade level, but it's really impacting their writing more, because it's impacting the orthography of the language more than it is the phonology, perhaps.
Thank you so much. And then down the road, maybe you could talk about students who might have these traits, produce work that looks like this, how we would discover that they are not dyslexic. And also, I'm still curious to hear why typing and orientating themselves on a type keyboard doesn't, I'm just still kind of not sure that's
they may still have that they'll probably still have that confusion even when they're typing. The thing with typing is that the way computers are designed now is it's going to fix those, right? It's going to fix it for them. It's especially if they have predictive software, it's going to have the orientation correct already.
Okay.
Right.
So what it does is it produces the product in a way it really just produces the product. It doesn't really make the experience any easier for the child.
It can make the experience easier, because not just my son, but students I've worked with who have become good typers, and especially using that predictive software tool, can put their ideas on paper much more efficiently than what it would be to handwrite it.
Right. So
and because they don't have to think about spelling as much, because especially predictive software, the spelling's already there. Now they have to be able to read the word to make sure they're picking the right one, right?
That's what I was wondering. My head was going to, that's where my head just went. You just said,
yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome, of course. At any point, ask questions. Okay, so you're right. This student really needs to work on grapheme phoneme options. Loved, you obviously want to point out all the good things that they have now. Great imagination, trying to, using a lot of great punctuation. They're struggling with spelling, struggling with the grapheme phoneme, struggling with the suffixing conventions, suffixes and prefixes and all those things. A lot of the same stuff that we were just talking about with the other student. Let's see, what time is it? 2:30. This is a 5th grader. So I want to take a moment to look at this and see what it tells you, like, what would you recommend for this student? So this is, I'm just because we're running up to 2:30 and I want to have time to talk about the rest of what we have to cover today. I'm going to tell you what it says. Our trip, look at their very first word. Our trip to San Diego was a blast. I love the hotel. It had a very deep pool. I love it so much. Love it. We went to SeaWorld and got wet by Shamu and ring ropes. I forget what that part was. Then we went to the dolphin and something show. I forget what that one is. Sorry, I apologize. I had to go to this special theater to do this test. That's where he was going to get his testing done for dyslexia. Then we went home. Roki was so excited to see us. Rookie is their dog. It was the best vacay. That's how he wrote vacation. Love it. A V and a K. Vacay ever. Let's go again. Look at his let's go again. And his again. Doing a lot of that sound symbol spelling. What do you notice about this 5th grader? What are some things you'd notice and or think they would need help with? The good, bad, and the ugly, as they would say. Vowel teams for sure.
He's doing good with his punctuation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great thought process too. It's pretty coherent, like it very sequential.
And actually, the capitals are good too.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And he seems to be using words he's seen before, even if they're the wrong word, like R
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
hotel.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. He actually has some sense of spelling, because you're right, it's probably a frequency that he's seeing.
Well, and Kristen pointed out synonyms. They do sound alike.
Yes. Yes. Well, yes. If you do whole and then tell, yes.
Mhm.
Definitely. Absolutely. And they're not synonyms. My God, homophones. Like, I think that's what you meant, Christine, is homophones. They sound similar. Okay. So one of the things we have to remember, one of the things we always have to remember is once we've identified needs, then our needs drive our goals and goals drive service. So when we go to, once we've seen writing samples, when we collected all the data, right? All the test scores, all of the informal data gathering that we've done, like looking at writing samples and the homework log and listening to them read, just, casually reading and doing a longer piece of recording of their fluency check for longer than 2 minutes. I apologize, I'm having really a hard word finding thing going on today. We've noticed that often there's not a spelling goal. And yet spelling is such a critical piece to their writing and their reading. And so it's often missing. Sometimes it is there. So here's an example. This is a real goal. When given visual spelling support, such as phonics cards or a personal spelling dictionary, Jack will spell words containing long vowel patterns and other vowel patterns correctly, or will correct misspellings with one teacher reminder. So here's some challenges with the goal. The visual spelling supports listed in the goal are actually accommodations. And though accommodations are entirely necessary, and sometimes we write goals with accommodations in there, but we acknowledge the accommodation, the student still needs to learn how to do the spelling, not just from picking it off a list, but they actually need to learn how to do this. This is a spelling goal. So they're not really learning how to do the spelling if we're just doing that. In the goal, it doesn't specify what vowel patterns is the goal referring to. So there are several, like the vowel consonant E, vowel combinations like double vowels, or vowel teams, and other options, right? There's the open syllable that could be. So what one are we talking about? And it goes on to say he will spell other vowel patterns. What does that mean? That just leaves it to the university to decide which vowel patterns. Like, how are we going to measure this, and how are we going to determine appropriate explicit instruction based on this goal? This is the part that we call is the kicker. If a student misspells a word, they almost always know they misspelled it. And if they could spell it correctly on their own, they would, and then they would correct it. But it says in the goal with one teacher reminder. It's not, the teacher reminder isn't going to teach them how to spell it. They'll just go, yeah, I know I misspelled it. I don't know how to fix it. And that's not actually teaching spelling. And most adults with dyslexia will tell you they can sometimes cannot even identify their own spelling mistakes, and looking them up is not productive. Sometimes they can, oftentimes they can, sometimes they can't. They're like, I have no idea if it's spelled correctly or not. So we have to have a goal that's so clear we know what the instruction is going to be. That's the purpose of goals. So here's some examples of goals that could possibly be, right? So an example of a spelling goal. Let me do this for a second. There we go. For a free base word, meaning a free base is a base that doesn't require any affixes added to it to be a complete word. So this brings out orthographic awareness. It helps them with reading and with spelling, but we can classify it under spelling goal. By 1 year from today, when given a list of 25 grade level words, you put whatever's in parentheses, you put the appropriate things containing a free base and prefixes and or suffixes. And here's an example. This is probably a second grader. Playing, played, plays, playful, edits, editing, unedited. The student will be able to successfully encode, which is spelling, the free base, the affixes, and identify the grammatical use of the affixes with 90% accuracy as measured by teacher kept data. This is teaching the student structure of language. It's teaching them about bases. It's teaching them about free bases and bound bases. This is a way for the student to be able to start to learn structure of language so that they can apply it to new words as well. All right, so there's one. This is the same, basically the same goal, but with bound bases. Bound bases mean it must have at least one other word element, a prefix or a suffix added to it to be a complete word. So it would be by date 1 year from today. The date part shouldn't be in the parentheses. When given a list of 25 grade level words containing a bound base and prefixes and affixes, the example would be like fraction, fracture, infraction, instruct, instruction, structure, because the base in the first words is FRACT, cannot stand by itself and be a complete word, has suffixes added to it or a prefix and a suffix. The base in instruct, instructions, and structure is STRUCT. It's not a word by itself. It means to build. But you can add prefixes or suffix to get a complete word. A student will be able to successfully encode the bound base, the affixes, and identify the grammatical use of the affixes with 90% accuracy as measured by teacher kept data. So those are examples of goals that we could write based on looking at what our students' writing samples were telling us about what they understood about language. That's not the only goals they may need. They may need instruction in grammar for sentence structure. They may need instruction in capitalization and punctuation. But those are just some looking at the word level. Some vocabulary goals. Sometimes we get pushback with writing spelling goals because schools claim they don't want to teach spelling, which I'm sure is not happening in Santa Barbara, but sometimes it happens. That we can do it. We can do the same kind of concept under vocabulary goals because everybody believes students should improve their vocabulary. And there are 3 different types of vocabulary. There's our speaking oral vocabulary, our reading vocabulary, and our writing vocabulary. And improving vocabulary helps improve reading, writing, and oral vocabulary. Improving oral vocabulary can help reading, can help writing. Improving writing vocabulary can help our reading. Our reading vocabulary can help our writing. It requires explicit instruction. It should include morphology, should include etymology, and it should include word families. Word families meaning the word family based on a base, not a rhyme family. So there's two different types of word families. There's a word family like at, bat, cat, fat, sat. That's a rhyme family. A true word family shares a base like instruct, instructor, instruction, what the ones that were shown in the previous goals, those are word families. So basically you're going to see kind of the same exact thing as the previous goals, but we're putting it under vocabulary if that makes people feel better, I guess. My one from year from today, when given a list of 25 words, and there you go. It's basically the same thing. And we're writing it under vocabulary if there's a resistance to write it under spelling. I prefer it be written under spelling because if they can improve spelling, then they can improve their reading and writing. Okay, so do you guys have any questions about what we've covered so far? And hopefully it was helpful to some degree, because I want to move into giving a quick overview of the appropriate type of remediation for students that need reading and writing instruction. Any questions, comments? Was it helpful, not helpful?
Very helpful. I like the goals.
Oh, good.
If we could just get people to write them.
You can do it all the time. All the time. Good. Okay, so what does appropriate instruction look like for students that need help with improving their basic skills in reading, spelling, writing, etc.? Is that I call it instruction / remediation because it really is an instructional approach. It should be from day one for these kids, but because they're falling behind, it's considered remediation as well. It needs to teach the structure of the English language, including but not limited to the phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, phonics, the phoneme-grapheme relationships. A lot of times in our schools, the phonics programs are teach a one-on-one or maybe two grapheme phoneme options. Many of our graphemes, our letter correspondences have more than one phoneme, and many of our phonemes have more than one way to be represented with a grapheme. So to just give a quick example, if we took the grapheme C, right, it can, and we always tell our students, we teach our students, we spell with graphemes because we have 1-letter graphemes, we have 2-letter graphemes, we have 3-letter graphemes. And the number of 1-letter, you know what, let me do this really quick because I think this is really interesting. These are my grapheme cards that I'm going to show you. They're very big. See, they're very large. These are 1-letter graphemes. You see how thick this is? Not very thick. This is all 2- and 3-letter graphemes. Do you see how thick that is? Compare it to this little section. But phonics programs spend almost all their time on our singular letter graphemes. And we have all these 2- and 3-letter graphemes. But if we look at our grapheme C, which I'm going to see if I can find it in my pile really quick. It obviously, the most common phoneme representation for the grapheme C is K, right? And there's rules for when we use a C versus a K or versus an S, right? And so when the next phoneme or the next grapheme is an E, I, or Y, it's going to shift that phonology of that C to a S. So that's one of our other options, right? But there's something that gives us an idea of when that's going to happen. So there is, and did you know that we actually represent in our words with a C more often than we do with a K? So we use a C when we can't, we use a K when we can't use a C in most of our words, because if it's followed by an E or a Y and we want it to represent K, then we have to use a K as opposed to a C. Okay, so it can represent ch, like in cello, right? It can represent sh, like in ocean. I'm missing one and it's not popping in my head right now. But so there's different, so that one grapheme has at least 4 different options. Now the cello comes from French and we don't have a lot of words that that's true for. And like an ocean is not very common as well, but it does happen. But we have other ones like our grapheme T has multiple phonemes that are represented, that are matched to it. And yet we usually just teach it with it. So they need to have all that explicit instruction of the grapheme phoneme relationships. Morphology, be taught about bases, roots, prefixes, and suffixes. Bases and roots are not the same thing. Roots is where it came from in history. It's the etymology of the word. Base is present day spelling. One root can have more than one present day base. So they need to learn the difference between bases and roots, but also about prefixes and suffixes. They need to learn about syllables, that it's a unit of oral written language with one vowel pattern. They're usually taught that it's one vowel sound, but it's more accurate to say it's one vowel pattern. They need to be explicitly taught spelling rules, like why do we spell match, M-A-T-C-H? Why isn't it not just M-A-C-H? There's an actual rule that goes with that. They need to be taught syntax, the grammar, the sentence variation, the mechanics, and they need to be taught semantics, the meaning based of our language and how things work together within words and within sentences. What we need to do is use structured literacy that is systematic, it's explicit, and it's multisensory. For our students, they need it to be very, very explicit, so explicit that they can explain why a word is spelled the way it is. They understand, they can explain it to somebody else. They need to understand, why is there a T in words like match, M-A-T-C-H? Why is it there? Why do we spell, action, A-C-T-I-O-N and not A-C-S-H-U-N? Why do we spell it that way? They would be able to tell you. And it has to be very multisensory. They need all the senses engaged as much as possible. So some examples of approaches, these are not programs, these are approaches, instructional approaches that fit within this framework are Orton Gillingham and Slingerland. Those are both based on the same framework. Orton Gillingham and Slingerland are based on the same framework. OG is designed for one-on-one or very small group, like 2 or 3, maybe 4 students at the very most. Slingerland is designed for the classroom or small group. Structured word inquiry is a completely different approach, and I'm going to talk about both of them in just a moment. And it's designed for one-on-one or classroom. It can be done with anybody, but they're very, very different approaches. But they both fit under this concept of structured literacy. So Orton Gillingham was developed by Samuel T. Orton and Anna Gillingham many, many decades ago. It is a method, it's not a program. There are programs on the market based on Orton Gillingham, also usually called OG. Such examples are Wilson, Barton, Take Flight, Language, what's the one out of Minnesota? There's many. There's some that are, and those are all pretty good programs. The one Language is designed for 3rd grade on. There are some that are on the market that claim to be based on Orton Gillingham and are very good. So if you're going to use an OG-based program, prepackaged program, make sure it's a good quality one. Orton Gillingham is based on the alphabetic principle, that spoken syllables sounded out approach. It explicitly teaches syllable types, syllabication rules, spelling rules, exceptions that follow a pattern. So it doesn't follow one of the syllable type rules, but it follows a pattern. They call them exceptions. And then they have words that are called sight words. There's no way in the Orton Gillingham approach that you can explain the spelling of a sight word. So they call them sight words, and they have a special memorizing technique where it's very structured, it's very multisensory, and they have to memorize. It's a small number of words compared to the number of words in English language. Almost all of them can be taught through syllable types or exceptions, but they do have some that there's no way to explain it. Orton Gillingham has a very specific progression. You start at the beginning of the progression, does not matter the age, doesn't care if they're in kindergarten or they're a 90-year-old adult. You're going to start at the same exact place, which is the beginning of the progression, and you work your way through the entire progression unless they've had previous OG instruction and you pick up where they left off. But you want to start at the very beginning because there's always holes, and they need not only to be able to read a word that's a closed syllable like cat, but they have to tell you why you figure it out as cat. So it's the why part that's really important, and that's what they learn through the progression, that explicit piece, right? It uses real and nonsense words and controlled text. Controlled text means they're only exposed to words when they're reading sentences or paragraphs. that are within the rules that they've learned so far. And this is a very teacher-driven approach. It's student-centered, meaning you only move as fast as a student can move through the progression, but the teacher decides what's coming next because it's based on what the progression is. So it's very structured. So it's either going to teach 6 or 7 syllable types. The ones that do 6 syllable types aren't teaching anything less. It's just that they're combining 2 of the syllable types into one, which is the vowel teams and the diphthongs. So these are just examples of each type of syllable. The closed syllable, which all Orton Gillingham programs start with the closed syllable, or when you do just the pure approach, it starts with the closed syllable. It's the one that is always first. It's where we get one of the primary ways we get our short vowel sounds. It follows a vowel consonant. It can have a consonant before. It can be just vowel consonant. It doesn't have to have a consonant before. Patterns, we're always looking at vowel patterns. Where are the vowels and how are the consonants related to it? And that's how you figure out what type of syllable it is. So it's a vowel followed by 1 or more consonants and has a short vowel sound. So cat has 1 vowel followed by one or more consonants, has short vowel sound. Upset is a 2-syllable word that has 2 closed syllables in it. So when you're working through the progression, whichever syllable type you're on, you start with 1-syllable words with that syllable type, and then you move into polysyllabic words within that syllable type, but only combining with syllable types they've already learned to date. So an example of open syllables would be where you have a consonant and then a vowel or just a vowel. And it's one way we get our long vowel sounds. So like in me or table, me is a 1-syllable word, table. That first syllable in table is an open syllable. It has 1 vowel. It's not followed by a consonant within the syllable, where he's talking about within the syllable. And then it has a consonant LE syllable, but you wouldn't use that unless you taught the consonant LE syllable already. The next one is vowel consonant E. That's where you have a vowel followed by consonant, followed by the final E that marks the previous vowel long. Most kids know this one by the time we see them. It's really common. It's when you ask somebody why there's an E at the end of the word, they'll almost always tell you it's because it makes the previous vowel long. That is only 1 of 10 functions a final E can have. Only 1. It is a common one, but it's only 1. So all Orton Gillingham progressions start with the closed syllable. Those first 3 closed open vowel consonant E will always be the first 3 syllable types, or almost every program I've seen they have been, or approach I've seen. It may go closed vowel consonant E, then open, or go close, open, then vowel consonant E. It doesn't matter. You're still going to cover all the same stuff. The next 4 can be taught in any order. It depends upon whose progression you're following or whose program you're following. But just to give examples, so there's a vowel team, there's vowel diphthongs. So vowel teams is where you're going to either get a long vowel sound or a short vowel sound when you have 2 vowels together. Looking at my time. Diphthongs is when you get a new vowel sound like oi or ow. It's not a short or a long vowel sound. Those are not the only diphthongs, by the way. It's just 2 examples. R-controlled is when you have a vowel followed by a single R. They're called rhotic vowels. It's because our R controls the pronunciation of that vowel. So it's not a short vowel sound or a long vowel sound. So like in cart, our AR is R. It's not a short A sound. Our ER in ever is So when you have a single vowel followed by a single R, it's called a rhotic vowel. And then our last one is consonant LE. This is the only one you can't teach as a single syllable. Start with single syllable and move into multiple syllables, because there is no word in the English language that's a consonant and then the vowel, the letter L, and then the vowel E, because that's exactly what it is. It can be any consonant and then the letter L and the letter E. So like sparkle and griddle are examples. So it has to be combined with at least 1 other syllable type to be able to make a complete word. And so the progression will start with the closed syllable. There's a ton of stuff you learn within each syllable type. It isn't just, what are the rules for that syllable? There's lots of rules. Then you look at the exceptions within that rule, any spelling rules that go with that syllable type. And there's a lot to learn within each syllable type. It usually takes a student about 2 to 3 years to get through a OG progression. It's very multi-sensory. There's phoneme tapping, there's syllable counting, there's letter cards, and letter cards are used for decoding and encoding, for reading and learning to spell. There's syllable cards, there's word cards, there's scooping words, I'm going to show you that in just a moment. You can do sliders for rhyme families. There's a picture of that down here on the bottom, where you cut like little slits in an index card and you put the word family here, and then they can put these sliders through to practice their words. And then there's the sight word study method, which I'm going to show you in a moment. And that's for words that don't follow any of the OG rules. I'm going to cut it close. So after a student has learned, this is just to give you an example what a student can do after they've learned 2 syllable types, the open and the closed, and a spelling rule. And I'm just going to give you the spelling rule because we don't have a lot of time to do examples to help you figure it out. But in English, we don't have words end in a final V. And it has to do with what script looked like historically. They had to put an E there so you could tell that it was actually a V before it. And that because the spellings were written that way, they stuck that way. So in English, we don't have words end in a final V, so we always put an E there. That's one of the other functions. So now you know 2 functions of the final E. It can mark the previous vowel along, or it could be there because of the final V, right? And you're all probably thinking of, well, what about, and if you come up with the word rev, just know that that's a clip from revolution, and we have clips in our language in present day English, just like we have flu from influenza, and there's a few other clips that we have in our language, but it's not that it's an exception, it's that it became a clip that is in present day English. So in this case, this is how a student goes about this. So it wouldn't be all marked up like this. They would just see this long word. And the first thing they're going to do is put dots under all their vowels because they're always looking for vowel patterns. That's the key here. We're always looking for vowel patterns. Then they're going to apply syllabication rules. They're explicitly taught syllabication rules. And they start to learn them in the closed syllable progression. And so one of the rules they learn is that you divide between consonants that are not consonant blends, like NR is not a consonant blend. If they know prefixes and suffixes, we'd ask them, do you recognize any prefixes or suffixes? This one happens to have 2. It has UN and RE. But if they don't, then they're going to apply their syllabication rules. NR is not a consonant blend, so they're going to divide between that. SP is a consonant blend. It happens to be a consonant. There's only 2 consonant blends that can be beginning or ending consonant blends, SP and ST. Like BL isn't an ending blend, it's only beginning blend, right? TR is an only beginning blend, it's not an ending blend. ND is only an ending blend, it's not a beginning blend. So there's, they learn these things, they're explicitly taught all these. SP is one that can be beginning or ending, like spoon or grasp, right? It's most common at the beginning. So what is it most common? It's at the beginning. So let's leave it at the beginning. We're not going to split it up. And if they recognize this IVE suffix, then they would scoop it as IVE. If they don't, they would divide between the N and the S. It's not going to change anything. Then they start applying their rules. So I have 1 vowel followed by a consonant. That means it's a closed syllable. My vowel sounds short. I have 1 vowel not followed by a consonant within the syllable, means it's open. It's a long vowel sound. I have 1 vowel followed by a consonant, means it's closed. It's a short vowel sound. This is how well they learn the rules. They can tell you all of this, right? I have 1 vowel, this E's here because it's not doing vowel work. It's there because of our final V. So this is really a closed syllable because this is not doing vowel work. It's not doing anything. It's not changing this I to a long vowel. So it's really a closed syllable because we have 1 vowel followed by a consonant. It's a short vowel sound. Then they go about sounding it out. Un, re, unresponsive. And they can figure out this polysyllabic word by applying all of the rules they've learned for the syllable types, the grapheme phoneme options, the spelling rules, and they can figure out polysyllabic words. This is just to show you what the multisensory, an example. This is our multisensory sight word study method for our OG program. They write it on a card. They have to be able to read the word. We have a little cue in the bottom right corner of how to pronounce it if they need it. They tap under each letter. So they have their index card. They're tapping under each letter as they say the letter. And then they say the whole word and they do it twice. So they go S-I-G-N sign, S-I-G-N sign. So they're tapping under each letter as they say it. And then they draw their fingers underneath. The next one is they're going to trace over it. We tell them to do it with the back of their pencil or with a pen that's not lit because you don't want it to get super messy because they're going to do this a bunch of times. And then they trace over it and say each letter. So they go S-I-G-N sign, S-I-G-N sign. They're actually making contact with the index card. The next one, they're going to tap it down their arm. Oh, no, sorry. They're going to trace it on the table. I skipped one, sorry. So with their two fingers, I'm going to take two fingers and trace it on the table, and they say each letter. Ideally, you have it flipped over so they can't see it at this point, and they're trying to remember what it looks like. So S-I-G-N, sign, S-I-G-N. If they have to look at it, that's fine. The next one, they definitely shouldn't be looking at it. They tap it down their arm. They go S-I-G-N, sign, S-I-G-N, sign, and then they write it in their notebook, and they can flip their card over and check themselves. So it's a self-correcting activity. It's a really good multi-sensory effective way for memorizing words that there's no explanation for the spelling. So let me see. We have just a few minutes left to get me through structured word inquiry, an overview of structured word inquiry. I think I can do it. So structured word inquiry is based on the fact that English is a morphophonemic stress time language, not a syllable time language. So what does that mean? It means that our spellings are primarily based on meaning. So meanings, morphemes are the smallest part of the word that carry meaning, So morphemes are the smallest, so it's morpho, and then phonemic is the sound system, right? So we look at the morphemes first, and we have stress, and that's what causes schwa. You know, that upside down E you guys see in the dictionary, that's called schwa. And we have a lot of schwa in our language. So we have stressed or unstressed syllables. So schwa happens in unstressed syllables. So that's why we're a morphophonic stress time language. The structured word inquiry approach is based on scientific inquiry, where you make a hypothesis about the structure of the word. Then you find evidence to support or falsify. And it's through that process you learn about the structure of the language. It teaches morphology, the structure and sequence of meaning, looking at bases, prefixes, and suffixes. It teaches etymology, the interrelationship of sense of meaning and history of the word, which is the root of the word. It teaches phonology. It's an equally important part. It's the order that you do it in structured word inquiry that is different. So phonology is the driving piece in OG. It's not the driving piece in structured word inquiry. Morphology is. Phonology is equally important, but it's not the first thing you look at. It's the order you look at it. And then it does not have any exceptions or sight words, because you can explain the spelling of every word. There is not a specific progression. You can literally start with any word in the English language and start studying with structured word inquiry. It does not use nonsense words or controlled text, because there are no nonsense words in structured word inquiry. And then it is teacher and student driven, because the students help direct through their questioning, what they're going to be looking at. So structured word inquiry is based on the fact that we have to look at morphology first. You have to take into consideration the etymology and look at phonology last, not because it's least important. You just have to do it in that order. They're all equally important. It uses the scientific inquiry approach. It is based on asking 4 questions. It teaches the conventions of the English language, and it teaches the grammar. These are the 4 guiding questions of structured word inquiry. What does it mean? How is it built? What is its word structure, its morphemes? Who are its relatives, its etymological and morphological relatives? The etymology will give us ideas about its word family, and what graphemes function coherently in the word family, the phonology. So that phonology is equally important. It's the last question we deal with. These ones interplay a lot. These ones right here. So to just give you a quick example, let's look at does and why we don't spell it as D-U-Z, and why sometimes students spell it, how we can help them to not spell it as D-O-S-E, which is a completely different word. So we're going to ask the 4 guiding questions. We talk about what does it mean, how is it built, who are its relatives, and how is it represented in what graphemes work coherently across the word family. So we talk about what it means, and we'd have that conversation with the student, and we talk about how is it built. Well, what does mean? It means you're doing something, right? It's to do something. So our base in does is D-O, and we always spell bases because the pronunciation can shift. This is not the do family or the do matrix, it's the D-O matrix. These are its word families: does, doing, done, redo, redoes, redoing, redone, undo, undoes, undoing, undone. And we add our base with our prefixes and suffixes. These are called word sums. Word sums show the structure of the language. Now, in this particular case with the DO family and the GO family, we don't have any suffixing conventions in play. There's only 3 suffixing conventions. There's replace the final E, there's the doubling, like going from hop to hopping. There is changing your Y to I. Those are the only three suffixing conventions there are. None of that's in play here, so we wouldn't be dealing with that with these word families. For a prefix or suffix to be a real prefix or suffix, we must find it in one other word in the English language that has a different base using the same suffix, meaning, and that suffix means the same in both situations. This is so if you're familiar with ES, ING, this NE is what throws people. So we have one word in the English language, GONE. This is a historical suffix that we don't use to make new words anymore. So it's called a non-productive suffix because we don't make new words with it. But it is a real suffix because we have this other word gone. But the pronunciation shifts. Look at it when we have these are free bases. So do as a word is pronounced do, right? But so that it's d, oo, that O is representing oo. But when we go to does, it changes. D, our grapheme O is now instead of oo. And so it changed. That's why we can't say it's the do matrix, because it can be pronounced in different ways. It's how the grapheme, the morphemes interact that helps us figure out the pronunciation. And so that's what we do in the last step, is looking at our grapheme phoneme options and the different ways that those graphemes are pronounced within the word family. That's a big overview. That etymology is a big piece of this. This is a great resource. It's called Etymonline. It tells you the history of the words, and it can give you information to figure out the morphemes, but it isn't always do it that way. So what's the same and different? I know we're up against the clock, so I'm going to make this really quick. What's the same and different between OG and SWI? They're both structured, they're both explicit, they're both multi-sensory, because there's multi-sensory techniques that are added into the SWI as well. They both teach phoneme grapheme options. OG does it through the progression, and then the instructor decides when to teach the next thing. It doesn't also teach all the grapheme phoneme options appropriately. SWI identifies all of it through discovery. They both teach some conventions, like they both teach every written syllable must have a vowel. They both teach spelling rules, like we'll teach the double F, double L, double S, double Z rule. It doesn't necessarily both teach all the functions of the final E that you learn, and SWI aren't always explicitly taught in an OG progression. They both do teach morphology. OG addresses it much later in the progression. Structured word inquiry, it's literally from day one. From the very first word you study, you're looking at morphology. And word families in OG are usually referred to as rhyming families, like at, back, half, at, sat. In SWI, it is the true word family. It's based on the base, like likes, dislike, etc. Both OG and SWI work at the word level. So additional strategies for reading comprehension, fluency, and written composition are needed. They need direct, explicit instruction in developing these skills. For reading, OG uses only controlled text. SWI uses instructional level text, which is not controlled. Some things that you can supplement with are like visualizing and verbalizing from Linda Bell. It's one of my most favorite programs. There's hands-on English linking blocks for the grammar piece. Fantastic. Using graphic organizers, but explicitly taught how to use them and explicitly taught how to use editing guides. All right, that brings me to resources, and I'm not going to go through any of these. And to the Q&A. We don't do Q&As at DTI because question starts with QU. With the grapheme QU, that's a 2-letter grapheme. So we do Q&As. So I know I ran through some of that kind of quickly. We are going to be doing accommodations in the next one, but we can also talk a little bit more about remediation. So if you guys have any questions, you're welcome to ask. I know I did that last part a little bit quickly, and I apologize, but I really want to get an overview of that remediation in. If you don't have any questions, this is what Kelly and I always say. If people don't have questions, we either did such a great job, there's no questions left, or they're so baffled they have no idea what to even start asking. And we always go with option 1.
I have a question.
Oh, good.
Hi. I am rolling out Orton Gillingham based program here at Cleveland Elementary in Santa Barbara. And
Are you doing
so
a specific program or just doing the approach?
we're using a combination of it's mainly Project Read.
Mhm.
And there's also some elements of Linda Mood Bell. However, from what I can tell, it only uses their sight word list and some of their syllable cards. So it's not largely based on Lindenwood Bell, and Lindenwood Bell, I used to work for them and I know that they have a different approach than Orton Gillingham. But from what I've been able to see, it seems like Project Read is based on OG. And so they use that same technique of learning sight words that you touched on with the tapping and saying the letter names. I've found that with my students, they're really not catching on to sight words using that technique, because they've been learning that, you know, I mean, not that they understand it this way, but they have to orthographically map words, you know, for them to stay in their memory. And so when they just tap and say the letter names, they're really not hanging on to those, you know, and they're really confused by, why do I have to say the letter name rather than, you know, sounding it out and blending it like the rest of the words that we've been working on. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about like that specific technique versus like teaching them that like I want to tell them something like, you know, this is a tricky word, but we just haven't learned that pattern yet. And so for now, you need to remember it as this. So I just wondered if you had thoughts on the sort of those two approaches.
I do have thoughts. I always have thoughts. So in Orton Gillingham, the challenge is like I don't like calling them tricky words, but in Orton Gillingham, there are some words that there's nothing in Orton Gillingham going to explain the spelling. So to give you an example, like done, right? Or sign, SIGN. Through Orton Gillingham, there's no way to explain why there's a G in sign.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So through structured word inquiry, you can explain it because it's part of a word family. So if you think about bases, so every word in the English language must have a vowel, right? But it also has to have a base because it's the main meaning part of the word. It has to have a morpheme that carries the main meaning part of the word. In the case of SIGN, it's a free base. It can stand by itself. So if we start thinking about what it means, it's a marker, an indicator of something. And then who's in its word family? And that's what gets really telling. If you think about it's a marker, indicator of something, if we start adding some prefixes and suffixes, what happens with the pronunciation? So if we add an AL suffix for signal, what's a signal? It's a marker, an indicator or something, right? So it has that SIGN base. So within the word family, it has to have, in the morphological word family, it has to share a meaning and share a spelling. Well, signal does. There's a SIGN as the base and a suffix AL. When you say signal, you hear the g, right? It's the same family also has the word signature and designate, right? Think about what those words mean. They share a meaning. They share a spelling, so they're morphologically related. So within the word family, we have this g in there. So within that word family, within that base, we have to have that G represented. We just don't pronounce it in sign. But it's in that word family. So we can explain the spelling, and when we can explain it and they understand the morphology of it, they're more apt to remember it because our brain's looking for meaning. But when you're just tapping without meaning, it makes it much more challenging. And that's why they're challenged with the sight word study method, is because this is just tapping out letters that carries no meaning.
Yeah. But for first graders, it might be a little much to go into that. It's not. I swear to God, it's not. I've seen it done with preschoolers. Oh, okay. Wow. That's
kids know morphemes before they come to school. Do you know how you know they know morphemes? They just don't know they're called morphemes because they walk in your class and they say, I run it down the hall. Now you know exactly what they meant, and they know exactly what they meant because you understood the morphemes. They had a base RUN and they added a suffix that meant past tense ED. Now we don't say runded, right? We say ran, which is there's strong and weak verbs, and it happens to be a weak verb, a strong verb. So a lot of people call them regular and irregular, right? They're in linguistics, they're called strong and weak. But so they know, they say those kind of things. They make up words like that all the time because they're mixing morphemes because they understand the morphemes.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So they already know what morphemes are. You just have to tell them that's what they're called and show them, like with this word family, oh, look at this. So To give another example, the word give, right? We have that final E there. When you ask somebody, why is there final E in give? They're like, to make the previous vowel long. I'm like, but it has a short vowel sound. So it doesn't
Mhm.
work, right?
Mhm.
Now on gave, that works, right? On gave, that works. It makes the previous vowel long, but on give, that does not work. So why is it there? There's always a reason it's there. Well, it's there because we don't end words in English in a V because of what it looked like historically. So give and gave, you can explain those spellings. Give isn't an odd word. It's there. It's makes perfectly logical sense when you understand the rules that go with it, right? Now
Yeah.
in gave, it just happens to be doing two functions. It's marking the previous vowel long and bringing the final letter. And give, it's only doing one function, that final E.
Got
And
it.
so, but they'll come up with a word like I gived it to them, right? I
Mhm.
gived it to them. No, you know what they mean. They know what they mean, but that's not the word we use in English. In present day English, we say gave. And because they're putting morphemes together. They understand morphemes. So you just teach them within the structure of a word family what these morphemes are, and they do understand it.
Hmm.
It's a lot of fun, trust me.
Thank you for that. That's encouraging.
Interesting, isn't it? Did that answer your question?
It
'Cause I
did,
can-
yeah. I'm mainly just curious. I'm being told to do this tapping method, and I've just noticed that it doesn't, my students are not remembering their sight words, and saying the letter names really is not it does, I think on a
They have to be
fundamental
doing
level,
that
it doesn't make sense to them because they
multi-sensory with it, and it takes.
yeah.
So when I did only OG, they could learn their sight words that way. It took a lot of work, of course, but what they would do is I would tell them, they would have to practice each word a couple times every day. So they would just, if they had like, depending upon the student, anywhere between 3 and 7 words to practice every day, but they would
Yeah.
have those same words until they could get it down, right? And
Yeah.
maybe some of them they learn faster than others, so we were just rotating some in and out, and
Yeah.
it was had somewhere between 3 and 5 words they're practicing, but it would take them like not even 5 minutes to get through it in a day. So it
Yeah.
was, not like sit down and do this for a half an hour. It was, do your practice with the sight word study method, and then every day they came to tutoring, they would take out their words, they'd have to read it to me, and if they could read it and they could spell it that day, they got a check mark on the word. And when they had like 4 or 5 check marks on their word card for that word, because they only get one a day, they usually had it down by then.
Okay.
But it's a lot, they have to practice a lot,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's not really building understanding is more effective.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm noticing, is that like they're memorizing it, and I know that they will get it eventually, they'll hang on to it, but I wonder whether I should just be teaching them to understand in the first place, and whether that's
The brain's
more.
always looking for meaning. The brain
Yeah.
is always looking for meaning.
Yeah.
Definitely. Good question though. Thanks. Any other questions you guys might have? Great.
Right. Well, thank you, Tracy, for that great training. We really appreciate it. And our next training, is it you or Kelly, Tracy, in the next training?
It's probably both of us now.
Okay.
We're both around.
All right, great. So next time is October 26th, and it's the same time, 1 to 3, and it will be the same link as of today.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you guys for joining us. I hope it was helpful for you. Of
Very helpful. Thank you so much.
course.
Great
My
to see
pleasure
you.
always. Always good to see you, Jen.
Take care.
Bye.